We see the longships, the axes, the chests of silver. The movies show us warriors, glorious and free. They rarely show you the children, the ones taken from the smoking ruins of a village, their value weighed not in gold, but in years of forced labor, in bodies that could be sold, used, and discarded. What happened to them after the raiders sailed away? You think you know the story of the Vikings, but the real story, the one written in bones, in cold-hearted laws, and in the ledgers of slave markets that stretched from Ireland to Baghdad, is worse than any movie dares to show. The journey of a captured child in the Viking Age didn't end with the raid. That was just the beginning. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. And tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. This script is built on hard evidence, not fantasy. We're drawing from sources like the detailed archaeological reports from the Wood Quay excavations in Dublin, published by the National Museum of Ireland, and the groundbreaking analysis of Viking-era social structures by historian Stefan Brink in his work The Viking World, published by Routledge in 2008. This isn't saga fiction, this is the truth found in the dirt. Now, back to the story. It begins with fire. The year is 869. The Great Heathen Army is tearing through East Anglia. The target is a monastery, or maybe just a coastal village. For a child hiding inside a timber frame house, the first sign is the smell of smoke. The second is the sound, not just shouting in a foreign tongue, but the splintering of wood, the screams of neighbors. The raiders are efficient. They kill those who fight, and they round up those who don't. They are not just looking for gold, they are looking for you. A boy of 10, strong enough to work. A girl of 12, old enough to be sold for a high price. You are now property. Your name is gone. Your family is gone. You are a thrall, a slave. The journey back is your first lesson in this new life. You are chained or roped, packed into a longship with dozens of others. The ship, a marvel of engineering like the Oseberg or Gokstad ships we found, is not built for comfort. It's a war machine and a cargo hauler. You are the cargo. The space is tight, maybe less than 1 square meter per person. The air is thick with the stench of fear, sickness, and unwashed bodies. You're exposed to the brutal North Atlantic weather, the freezing spray, the relentless wind. Food is minimal, a handful of dried fish, a sip of stale water. Many don't survive this journey. Dysentery, exposure, or despair claims them. Their bodies are tipped over the side without a word. For the raiders, it's a simple calculation of loss. For you, it's a warning. Your life has no value unless you can be sold. If you survive the voyage, you arrive at a place that looks like a vision of hell, a Viking Age trading hub. It could be Hedeby, in modern-day Germany, a sprawling town protected by a massive semicircular earthwork. It could be Birka, on an island in Sweden's Lake Mälaren, but most likely you end up in Dublin, or as the Norse called it, Dyflin. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Dublin was one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe. Archaeologists excavating at Wood Quay, near the city center, found the evidence. Not just the silver dirhams from the Middle East that paid for you, but the tools of the trade itself. Iron slave collars, known as bregdeana, and long chains with multiple neck rings. One such collar, found in the River Shannon at Clonmacnoise, is a masterpiece of twisted iron, heavy and inescapable. This was not a side business for the Vikings of Dublin. It was their primary source of wealth. The city was built on the buying and selling of human beings. You are cleaned up, just enough to be presentable. You're paraded before potential buyers. They check your teeth, your eyes, your limbs. They are merchants, farmers, chieftains. They speak a language you don't understand. But their meaning is clear. You're being assessed like livestock. A price is negotiated. A healthy child slave in the 10th century Dublin market might fetch between 12 and 20 ounces of silver, a price recorded in early Irish legal texts like the Uricecht Beck. That's the equivalent of 12 to 20 milk cows. Your life, your future, has been reduced to the weight of metal in a merchant's purse. You are sold. Now your new life begins. You are taken to a farmstead in Norway, or maybe a wealthy household in Iceland. Your world shrinks to the size of your master's property. The Icelandic law codes, the Gragas, compiled in the 12th century but reflecting older traditions, are brutally clear about your status. You are not a person, you are property, an irer, a unit of value, listed alongside cattle and tools. You can be bought, sold, inherited, gambled away, or given as a gift. If someone injures or kills you, they don't pay compensation to your family. They pay the weregild, the man price, to your owner, just as they would for a dead horse. You have no right to marry without your owner's permission. Your children, if you have any, are born into slavery. They belong to your master from their first breath. Your days are filled with relentless work. If you are a boy, you're sent to the fields, plowing, harvesting, tending livestock, or you might work in a quarry, cutting soapstone for lamps and bowls, a common task for thralls. The work is backbreaking, from sunup to sundown. If you are a girl, you work in the longhouse, grinding grain for hours with a heavy cornstone, weaving cloth on a vertical loom, cooking, cleaning, serving the master's family. Archaeological excavations of longhouses across Scandinavia show these distinct work areas. The cornstones found are often worn smooth from endless use. The loom weights are found in lines where the looms once stood. This was the domain of the female thrall. You sleep on the floor or on a simple straw pallet near the animals. You eat the scraps left over from the family's meal. Your clothes are rough, homespun wool. Your only purpose is to serve. Disobedience is met with swift and brutal punishment. The sagas are full of casual accounts of masters beating or killing their thralls for minor infractions. In the Laxdæla saga, a master named Hoskuld buys a slave woman named Melkorka, who he later discovers is a captured Irish princess. But before her royal status is revealed, she is his property, subject to his whims. This was the fantasy, that a slave might secretly be royalty. The reality was much bleaker. Most captured children were not princesses. They were the sons and daughters of farmers and fishermen, with no one to rescue them. The sagas, written by the elite, for the elite, treat the killing of a thrall as a minor event, a footnote in the story of a great chieftain. It was a master's right. Could you ever be free? The concept of manumission existed. A thrall could theoretically be granted freedom by their owner, often in a will. The Gullading law from Western Norway outlines a formal ceremony for freeing a slave, where the thrall is given a freedom el feast, but this was incredibly rare. For a child taken in a raid, the chances were almost zero. You had no family to buy your freedom. You had no way to earn the massive amount of silver required. For most, slavery was a life sentence, a slow grind of labor until your body gave out. If you value the deep research that goes into uncovering these uncomfortable truths, hit that subscribe button. It helps us continue to dig into the real history, beyond the myths. We're talking about a system so vast that the Old Norse word for a captured person from the British Isles was vestmader, or kasautner westman. There was a specific word for it because it was so common. The scale of this trade was immense. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents, it was an industry. A foundational part of the Viking economy. Back to the darkest corners of this world, the ultimate expression of a thrall's status as property was their use in ritual. When a powerful chieftain died, he wasn't expected to travel to the next world alone. He needed servants. In 922, an Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan traveled up the Volga River and encountered a group of Scandinavian traders known as the Rus. He witnessed the funeral of one of their chieftains. His account is one of the most chilling and detailed eyewitness reports from the Viking Age. He describes how, after the chieftain was placed in his ship, ready to be burned, one of the man's slave girls volunteered to die with him. Ibn Fadlan's description of what follows is horrific. The girl is passed from tent to tent, where she is forced to have sex with the chieftain's men. They tell her, "Tell your master I did this only for love of him." Then she is brought to the ship. She's given an intoxicating drink, forced to sing, and then led to a tent on the vessel. There, an old woman known as the Orjul, Angel of Death, holds her down, while other men strangle her with a rope. The Angel of Death then stabs her repeatedly between the ribs with a dagger. The ship is then set on fire, a funeral pyre for the master and his murdered servant. Is this just one sensationalized account? For a long time, historians wondered. Then, archaeology provided the grim confirmation. All across Scandinavia, we find what are called sacrificial burials. In Flakstad, Norway, a grave from the 7th century, just before the Viking Age proper, shows a wealthy man buried with weapons and goods. Buried next to him was a woman who had been decapitated. Her head was placed by her feet. At the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, dated to 834, 2 women were buried in a stunningly preserved ship filled with treasure. One was an older, high-status woman. The other was younger. For years, it was assumed she was a loyal servant who chose to die with her queen. But modern analysis of their remains tells a different story. The younger woman had a broken collarbone that was just beginning to heal, suggesting recent violent trauma. She also ate a much less nutritious diet than the older woman. She was likely a thrall, sacrificed to serve her mistress in death. While many of these sacrificial victims were women, there's evidence of children being subjected to similar fates. At the cult center of Tisø in Denmark, archaeologists have found numerous animal and human remains deposited in a lake as ritual offerings. Among them were the bones of children. In the saga of Hakon the Good, a chieftain named Jarl Sigurd is said to have sacrificed his own son to Odin to secure a victory in battle. If a nobleman would sacrifice his own child, what chance did a captured foreign slave child have? They were the most disposable people in this society. Their death meant nothing to their captors, except perhaps as a way to appease the gods or display the power of their master. This reality is written in the bones. Modern science gives us a tool the sagas never could: isotopic analysis. Your teeth store a chemical signature of the water you drank and the food you ate as a child. By analyzing the isotopes of elements like strontium and oxygen in the enamel of a skeleton's teeth, scientists can determine where that person grew up. When they compare that signature to the local geology where the body was buried, they can identify migrants. And in the Viking Age, a huge number of these migrants were not voluntary. A 2014 study published in the European Journal of Archaeology on a Viking cemetery at Skirping in Denmark found that several of the individuals buried there had isotopic signatures that pointed to them growing up in either the British Isles or elsewhere on the European continent. They were not Danes, they were foreigners, brought to Denmark against their will. Even more stark is the evidence from a mass grave found on the coast of Iceland at a site called Hrísbrú. The skeletons belonged to some of the earliest settlers. Isotopic analysis revealed a mix of people. Some were clearly from Norway, as the sagas like the Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, describe. But many others, particularly the women, had isotopic signatures matching Scotland and Ireland. The genetic evidence backs this up. Modern Icelandic men have predominantly Scandinavian paternal DNA, while Icelandic women have predominantly Gaelic maternal DNA. The story this tells is clear. Viking men sailed from Norway, raided the British Isles, captured local women, and brought them to Iceland as wives, concubines, and thralls to found a new colony. The founding of Iceland, a story so often told as one of heroic male explorers, was built on a foundation of human trafficking. The captured girls became the founding mothers of a nation, their own stories erased, their status reduced to that of breeding stock. The logic of this brutal world extended even to the children born within it. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, a practice known as utburder was common. It was the exposure of unwanted infants. When a child was born, the father had the right to decide if it would be raised up or carried out. If he chose to carry it out, the baby was taken into the wilderness and left to die of exposure or be killed by animals. The law codes permitted it. A child was not considered a full member of the community until the father formally accepted it. Children who were born disabled, or if the family was too poor to feed another mouth, were often exposed. The children of thralls were particularly vulnerable. A master might see the child of a slave as nothing more than a burden, another mouth to feed without any immediate return in labor. In a world where even a chieftain's own child could be legally left on a hillside to die, the slave's child had no hope of mercy. The escape from this life was nearly impossible. But what if you tried? The sagas mentioned thralls running away. The punishment for being caught was severe. In the Eyrbyggja saga, a group of Irish thralls, goaded by their cruel master, rebel and kill him. They flee to a remote island with their masters, women, and property. But they are hunted down. The leader of the Norse posse, a man named Vermund, tricks them and slaughters them all. The saga presents this as a righteous act of justice. The thralls who dared to seek freedom are portrayed as treacherous and deserving of their fate. This was the propaganda of the slave-owning class. It reinforced the idea that thralls were inherently untrustworthy and that the system of slavery was necessary to maintain order. The psychological impact on a child must have been devastating. Stripped of your family, your language, your culture, you were forced to assimilate into the world of your captors. You were given a new Norse name. You were taught to worship their gods. Every aspect of your old identity was erased. The trauma was constant. You lived in a state of perpetual fear, knowing that your life could be ended at any moment, for any reason, by the people who owned you. The children who survived this system did so by becoming invisible, by suppressing every instinct to fight back, by learning to be the perfect, obedient tool. The Viking Age ended. Christianity spread across Scandinavia, bringing with it the concept that all souls were equal before God. The practice of infant exposure was outlawed. Human sacrifice was condemned as pagan savagery. The great slave markets of Dublin and Hedeby declined as new political and economic structures emerged in Europe. But slavery itself did not vanish. It changed form. The thrall system was gradually replaced by a system of serfdom, where peasants were tied to the land. The chains became economic rather than iron, but the lack of freedom remained. The legacy of the thrall system endured for centuries, a dark undercurrent to the celebrated history of Viking exploration and conquest. We search for the evidence of these lost children in the ground, in slave collars pulled from Irish rivers, in the bones of sacrificed women in Norwegian ship burials. We find it in the Kol Dekas, precise language of the Icelandic law codes that valued a human child the same as a cow. But the most profound and enduring evidence isn't buried in the past. It's alive today, in the DNA of modern populations. A massive genetic study published in the journal Nature in 2020, led by Professor Eske Willerslev, sequenced the genomes of 442 human remains from Viking Age sites across Europe. The study revealed a complex picture of genetic flow. Skeletons buried in Scandinavia were found to have Pictish or Irish and other European ancestry. Skeletons in the British Isles had Scandinavian DNA. It was a genetic melting pot, created by trade, settlement, and violence. The children captured in raids were a huge part of that story. They were brought to Scandinavia, and if they survived to adulthood and had children of their own, their DNA entered the local gene pool. Their Irish or English genes became woven into the fabric of Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland. Their story is not a footnote to the Viking Age. It is the story. It's the hidden engine that powered the economies, built the farms, and even populated the new colonies. The movies show us the glory of the raid. The truth is that the wealth of the Viking world was not just built on silver and gold. It was built on the stolen lives and the broken bodies of hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom were just children. Their names are lost, their journeys are over, but their blood runs in the veins of the North.